So it's finally here. One of the longest, most overdue, and most requested videos on this channel that I somehow haven't made until now. And it's of course ranking every single Bluey character. Now of course, this isn't a completely new idea, as I actually did rank every Bluey character in a past video, but with that said, with it being made before Season 3 even came out, it has desperately been in need of an update, as it's missing a ton of new characters. And this, combined with the fact that some older characters have changed a lot, and because my old video really isn't that good compared to my newer ones, I thought an update was in order. So with that, let's go back to a classic and rank every Bluey character from the absolute worst to the absolute best, starting at the worst character in the F tier, and briefly talking about every single one until we reach the last, and of course best one, at the very top of what I consider the S tier. Oh boy, I wonder who that's gonna be. And also, when I say every Bluey character, at least on the Wikia anyways, there are of course some exceptions, mainly just to save time, with my main rule being to mostly limit my rankings to just sentient characters with at least one speaking line. So if you were excited to hear me talk about how the family car or the dingo wedding attendee are S tier characters, I guess I'm sorry. And also with that, characters directly based on real figures also won't be counted. Mainly because they usually don't have speaking lines anyways, and also like, just, how would you even rank someone like Queen Elizabeth II in a video called Ranking Every Bluey Character? Like, how would you honestly compare that with everything else? Although, with that said, I will also be making a few exceptions to this exception, because if I don't, it would mean that Jerry Lee would be excluded because he doesn't talk, and there's no way I'm going to not talk about him. But with all that said, we still got a ton of characters to rank, so without further ado, let's begin. So to begin, we have the F tier, which only has one single character. One character that is so despicable, so dislikable, that they basically have near zero redeeming qualities, and it's of course, our good old friend, the old pug lady. Anyone who's seen Granimobile already knows how hateable this character is, but in summary, she's completely entitled, mean, grouchy, annoying, and dare I say, possibly even a bit racist, if that makes any sense.
Muffin, honey, why don't we let... Kettle! Stay out of it, kettle dog!
Yeah, a true retail worker's dream we have here. However, with all that said, she's intentionally written to be mean, so maybe it doesn't really count, and she kinda gets what she deserves at the end by basically having her life savings taken away by Muffin. But regardless, I feel like I would be committing a crime not putting her as the worst, even if it's on purpose. So in the F tier she goes. And onto the E tier we go. So with something as oddly specific as the E tier, I obviously don't have too many characters to put here, but I decided it would complete the letter system. So anyways, here's 3 random characters that weren't even good enough for the D tier. Starting off, we have the Flying Fox Kid. I had no idea who this was until I found the Wikia page, but apparently it's that one weird kid who wouldn't let Bluey have a turn on the playground in Promises? Not an important character, and the like 5 seconds of screen time he does get doesn't exactly make him likable. Now up next, we have the Customer. What? You didn't know the Customer? He's like such an important character! I mean, he's literally friends with Bandit, and also, in the markets he even sells Poffergies. Except for the fact that he doesn't, because apparently, the Poffergy dog is actually a separate character, according to the wiki. Now, I'm pretty sure they're meant to be the same, as they literally have the exact same design, but different voice actors, I think? So yeah, I don't know if this one even counts, but if it does, it's not trying that hard to be unique. And now finally, for our last E tier entry, we have Cookie, from the sign. Honestly, the only reason why they're this low is because, well, there is no character! Cookie never actually appears anywhere in the show, and we basically know nothing about her. Yet despite this, she does have a brief speaking line on the phone where she talks about not seeing Frisky when she goes missing. So thanks to my speaking line rule, she technically counts. Other than that though, unless she was confirmed to be one of the extras at the wedding, there's really nothing else to her, so I guess that's it. Now, for the D tier, we got a few characters that aren't really bad per se, but either just a bit dislikable, or don't really add anything notable whatsoever to the show. And to begin this train of mediocrity, we have Chubbles. I didn't even realize this character actually had a name, but he's basically the chimpanzee who tells Chunky off in that one movie the characters watched, with him being honestly kind of a jerk, where he asks Chunky why he has to be so different and do other stuff, and that's kinda it. So yeah, he's kinda whatever. Now up next though, we have Cookie from Stickbird. Unlike the last Cookie, we actually know more about this one, and with that knowledge, we can confirm that this Cookie is an evil, vicious monster, tearing apart Bingo's precious Stickbird like that. I mean, who could do such a horrible act? A complete menace to society, how dare her! Okay, but jokes aside, she probably didn't know better. And outside of that, that's kind of it, so moving on. Next up, we have Employee. Every word he speaks makes it sound like he died inside 10 years ago, but honestly, there's something kinda charming about how unapologetically bored and neutral he is. And speaking of employees, we also have Docket Boy. I don't have a lot to say about this one since he's really one of those characters that just kind of fills space, but I did put him above Employee, as his moment in Kids where he stamps on Bandit's face by accident is super funny, and the idea of just some random worker finding this depressed rectangle in the toilet paper aisle is also kinda hilarious. Also, I do find it kinda interesting he looks almost just like the Postie. Pretty sure they just reused the same model with some alterations, but it's still something, I suppose. Now up next, we have a more intriguing character, and it's Hercules. Now overall, I think Hercules is a little bit interesting because of his role as this redeemed bully in the episode Circus, and also him just being a giant Saint Bernard, but outside of this, he does mostly act like a standard kids show bully for most of the episode. And unless we get more episodes of him, he's still kind of a generic, not exactly likable blank slate, which I think is the ideal character to put in the D tier if that makes any sense. But for a character that's less mean and more just outright gross, we have Buddy next. I might get some comments for this because I know he does have his fans. For some reason I cannot fathom, but overall, he doesn't really do that much, and when he does do something, it's mostly him picking his nose. Like, that's basically his whole character, outside of just being random. Although, credit where credit is due, he does have a couple funny moments, so there's that. And while on the subject of him, we also have his mum. She doesn't really do that much, but at least she doesn't pick her nose, so I guess that's technically better? Yeah, sorry, I got nothing else. But moving on, we have the Pony Lady. This one is a bit difficult because while she does have a cool character design, she really doesn't do that much. And if anything, her only purpose was to basically continue the conflict in markets where Bluey and Indy can't ride the ponies together, denying innocent children fun, and ones with limited resources at that. What an absolutely vile, greedy, And you know, to play devil's advocate, she is running a business and she of course has to make some money, but the fact that she doesn't just let them both ride separate ponies anyways, makes her possibly come off as a bit dislikable. Although I guess the episode would have ended super early if this is how it got resolved, so I guess it's kind of a necessary evil.
Can we ride buttermilk, please?
Okay, honey.
And speaking of characters involved with money, next we have the shopper from Granny Mobile. Overall, I actually kinda dig his design, and while he's nowhere near as infuriating as some other characters, his lowballing with Doreen's yard sale does come off as a bit annoying and like taking advantage of her. Although, to be fair, Doreen herself isn't exactly making it any harder for him anyways.
What do you want for this?
Oh, well, what do you think?
$2?
Okay.
But yeah, in general, taking advantage of the elderly isn't exactly the most likable character trait, but I guess it's important to the plot. Now up next though, we have the elderly themselves in the form of the Grey Nomads. Overall, I just dropped them here. That sounded really wrong. But anyways, I put them here because they really don't do a whole lot, and their designs are pretty simple, but they do seem like nice enough people who just want to travel, and who can really blame them for that? Although, with that said, they really need to drive faster, I guess, so hurry up, you old people! Up next, we have John Luke's dad, followed by John Luke's mom. These characters don't do much either, to the point that John Luke's mom is basically listed as a background character on the wiki. But on the other hand, despite the dad being an obvious Pat recolor, they aren't bad in any way, just not really noticeable or interesting in any form. However, to end the D tier off, we have Grubber's dad. This character is basically just Bandit dressed up as a German Shepherd, and he really is a giant nothing burger, or I guess sausage in the case of markets. But I guess there's worse characters he could have been modeled on, such as, oh, I don't know, every other character that's not Bandit, but in general, he's just really whatever. So for the C tier, we got a ton of characters, although with that said, most of them are just extras or minor characters that aren't notable enough to be in the B tier, and not dislikable or boring enough to be in the D tier. So with that, we're basically going to do a lightning round of extras, plus a few more important characters that I just don't personally enjoy as much. But to begin, we have Ziggy. Willing to bet none of you have any clue who this is, but apparently he's the guy who drops off Mort in the episode Phones, and also says he's developing an app or something, so unless it's Bluey, Twitter, or Reddit, good on him. Leela's brother. All he really did was accidentally break the piñata in Pass the Parcel, which, going off of his face, I'm not entirely convinced was an accident, but yeah, he's just kinda there, I guess. Rich J. Honestly, I don't really have a good reason to put him here, nor does he technically count, but I just wanted an excuse to talk about how he's seen in both the 80s flashback and the modern day of the show. And while it was just likely the studio reusing character models, the idea of him being a time-traveling kid is admittedly pretty funny. The librarian. Overall, I don't really care too much for her design, and her role is pretty minor, but she does seem like a really nice lady, and her being voiced by one of the ladies from that famous Bluey podcast is kinda neat. Hospital Kid and Hospital Kid's mom. These characters barely get any screen time, but it is kinda wholesome seeing the mom care for her kid, and I do hope that said kid is able to get better from whatever he's going through. At least, if he did get better. Sheila. Despite being the mom of Bingo's best friend Leela, she really doesn't get too much screen time, but from the bits we've seen of her, she seems to be a relatively nice and caring mom, and her design is, I guess, kinda nice too. Homeless Dog. So despite being a background character, I thought this one was quite interesting. Obviously, this character doesn't do a whole lot, and he isn't relevant to any episode or plot, but the fact that the show actually went out of their way to represent something such as poverty and homelessness, even in such a subtle way, is a really interesting choice if you ask me, and one I actually applaud them for doing, as it makes the show feel just a little bit more real. However, on the opposite of being real, we have Chunky Chimp, the main character from the movie Bluey watches. Overall, he's just kinda your standard, adventurous, curious kid protagonist most children's movies have. But to be fair, the whole point is that the film is kinda meant to be a parody of generic kids movies, so it kinda works, I suppose. And speaking of the movie, we next have the cinema counter dog, a truly important and stellar character indeed. His design is kinda cool, but overall he's also just okay. Puffer G Dog. If it wasn't for that one person in my comments section named after him, I would have honestly forgotten this character existed. But overall, while I really don't care for his design or see him as that memorable, if anything I remember it about as well as the show does, he is kinda cool, and honestly, selling these small sugared Dutch pancakes is a pretty neat job. I don't know what these actually are because I just looked up the definition on Google, but now I kinda wanna try one. Chippy. Compared to some other folks online, Chippy isn't a character that I really care for that much. Despite probably being around the same age as him, he's always been kind of just a whatever character to me, who really didn't do a whole lot in his episode. Although, with that said, the arc with Bluey and Bingo trying to figure out his relationship with his girl Cherry is kind of fun. And even though his design isn't my favorite, it's at least unique and kind of fun. 2. Chloe's mom. For a parent of one of the main friends in the show, she surprisingly doesn't do a whole lot, and is dangerously close to being a background character, but there really isn't anything wrong with her, and I think she's nice enough to be around this spot. Alfie's boss. Overall, despite his kinda tough appearance, he seems like a nice enough guy, and I just hope he takes good care of Alfie. Alfie's mom. Being the mom of Alfie herself, I really hope she takes good care of him, but from the little we've seen of her, it looks like she is, so good on her. The chemist employee. This is another one that I'm not sure really counts, because he doesn't have an audible speaking line, but I feel as if the 5 people who stand this character are gonna be furious if I don't include him. So yeah, overall, he's another character who's mostly there to just kind of fill space, but for a random extra, his design is actually pretty cool, and goes way harder than it honestly should, so that's a plus. The checkout lady. And I guess I'll just throw in the checkout dog too. As their very original names imply, these two characters basically serve almost the exact same purpose, just in different stores. Not much else to them, but they seem like pleasant enough people and don't deserve any grouchy grannies coming their way. The postie. For a no-name background character, this guy actually gets around a lot, with him both being forced to witness bandits dancing in dance mode, and being straight up chased by Bingo in the episode called, well, Bingo. In general, I honestly feel kinda bad for this dude, but he does have a pretty sick appearance on the Bluey stamp set, so that's cool. Vet Corgi. They're a corgi that's also a vet. Not really important, but both are neat, so I'll give it a pass. Harley. This character barely has any appearances, but her actual appearance in itself is surprisingly unique and honestly pretty cool for such an otherwise minor character. Zara. Another one of Bingo's classmates that isn't too well known, Zara is also just kind of there, but similar to Harley, her design is also kinda neat, although I think it's just a bit more distinct. Jasper W, Jasper G, and also Jasper G's mom, because sure, why not? I decided to group these together since they're all closely related, and I really don't have much to say about any of them, but I will say that the idea of having two similar characters with the same first name is kind of funny, especially since it's honestly pretty realistic. The French backpacker. He literally just has one line where he says he's from France, and that's it. But overall, he seems like a decent guy. Chubby Doob. Honestly, the only reason he got this far is because he's voiced by the show's composer, Geoff Bush. That's it. And I guess he also tells Chunky good messages too, so I guess cool character. Daisy. Overall, I don't have too much to say about Daisy, but she seems like a nice enough mom, and she doesn't eat soggy wafers like that evil monster Market!
Okay, Bluey's mom. Get up and dance around.
Juniper followed by Juniper's mom. As far as I know, none of these two have a notable role in the show, but I will admit that both of their designs are pretty cool. And their juice van or truck is pretty sweet, to the point that it was actually made into a playset that doesn't even include them. I guess that's what happens when you don't have main character status. The takeaway lady. Thankfully, this is not a lady who takes kids away, but rather just a dog who runs a local food place. I always thought her design was kinda weird, to be honest, as she basically looks like a cloud with colored eyes, but I guess it's at least different. Yoga instructor. Her human-like ponytail is honestly kinda weird to see on a Bluey character, but on the other hand, I think it's also kinda neat. Swimsuit dog. This dude's look is so 80s and downright over the top, I actually sorta like it. Grubber. For being a character with such a standout design and popular dog breed, he really doesn't get used for really anything. It's kind of a shame, to be honest. Lulu Russell. Overall, Lulu is one of those characters that's kinda hard to rank because for most people, there's no real in-between. Everyone either thinks she's dislikable because of how she treated her brother Jack in Army, or loves how adorable she is in Explorers. Because of that though, I think it's fair to put her just somewhere in the middle. Honey. For being one of the main characters in Bluey's friend group, Honey is surprisingly one that doesn't get too much attention, and arguably isn't even the most likable at times, with her sometimes being on the more demanding side, but overall, she isn't really that bad of a character, and she does actually have some good moments, so I think she also kinda belongs in the middle of the pack. Miss Retriever. For being Bingo's main teacher, she really doesn't have a lot of roles, but I guess that's mostly because her class in general doesn't get too much attention. Still a nice character though. The Sheepdogs. This couple was pretty much meant to serve just one role in one episode, but since their actions literally influenced one of the biggest moments in the entire show, I feel like they deserve at least a little bit of credit. Also, their design is kinda fun too. Dougie's mom. Not really much to say that isn't more about Dougie than her, but she does seem like a very nice and caring mom. Cherry. This might be an unpopular opinion, but personally, I think Cherry's design is actually cooler than Chippy. I don't know what she's like personality-wise, but something about her design is just incredibly cool. Bentley. There may be no Bentayga or Continental, but for a relatively minor character, she's not bad, I guess. Fun name though. The Terrier's mom. This is another parent that doesn't get a lot of attention, both from the show or even the fandom, but for what she is, she's also just kinda nice enough, and I feel like she deserves some credit for having to watch all three of the terriers. Pom Pom's mom. Another parent that isn't too prevalent, but also just kind of a standard nice character, albeit with a pretty cool design. Rocco. We've only seen this friend of Bandit a handful of times, but by random character standards, I do kind of dig his design, and he also seems like a pretty decent guy. Missy. Missy is another younger character you tend to hear very little of, but I guess her role of learning to be brave in the episode Pirates was at least something. Wicket Keeper. The name alone I think shows how prominent this character really is. But for a character with little plot relevance, their design is another one that's also way cooler than it honestly should be. Pretzel. For being one of the characters to reach the elusive toy figure status, Pretzel is really one that tends to also get forgotten, to the point that a decent amount who buy his toy don't even know who he is. But overall, he's also perfectly harmless, and his mini arc in the episode Calypso was kinda fun. Marcus. Being one of, and basically the only co-worker of Bandit we're currently aware of, Marcus and his position are kinda neat in that regard, but no amount of Bandit exposure will ever excuse him from consuming soggy wafers. How dare him! The Doctor. From Baby Race. And Bumpy and the Wise Old Wolfhound. and exercise. Not much to say about either of these other than the fact that they're, doctors. But the fact that they actually designed 3 separate models, or at least characters, is an oddly neat commitment to detail. The nurse. Putting her above the doctors seems kinda silly, but honestly, I think I enjoy her appearances a little bit more. The way she kindly treats Bingo and Bumpy and the Wise Old Wolfhound was kinda wholesome, and her visible confusion and annoyance towards Bandit's shenanigans in dance mode is also really fun to watch. Snicker's mom. The Bluey website describes her as being an eloquent dachshund with a distinct laugh. Said it better than I ever could, to be honest. Unicorns.
Oh no, not unicorns.
Okay, so you know how I said there were gonna be some exceptions to my rule? Well, this one's an example, because despite being a toy puppet, I think he kinda counts because he sorta has his own arcs and personality separate from his controller Bandit, and although I am aware he is actually quite popular, I've never personally enjoyed him that much.
You need to leave! It's disgusting.
Maybe I'm already just too old for loud and rambunctious characters, but he's just never been a favorite for me. Although, I don't really outright despise him either, as some of his moments are kind of funny. Coco. Despite appearing in quite a few episodes, Coco doesn't seem to be a character that's super popular, and honestly, I can kinda see why. Compared to the others in Bluey's friend group, her stories aren't really as impactful, and there's nothing really about her character that's as likable or enjoyable compared to a lot of the others. Regardless though, she is relatively harmless despite that. Police Dog. This one was super popular on Twitter with fans for some weird reason, because I guess people think he's attractive or something? Personally, I don't see it as much as some others, and I do think he is actually overrated in that regard, but he's fine I suppose. And finally, to end off our onslaught of just okay, fine Bluey characters in the C tier, we have Lucky. This one gets super close to the B tier, as he isn't annoying or dislikable in any aspect, and whenever he does appear, he's usually fine enough. But on the other hand, it's also really hard to appreciate him too much, as he doesn't really have that much relevance in the show, and is kind of just a blank slate character-wise. If he maybe got at least one prominent episode or role of some sort, I would have probably moved him up. And speaking of moving up, we will do that ourselves, and move on to the B tier. So for the B tier, we also have quite a few characters, although now that we're getting up a level, these characters will be a lot more prominent, aka ones most people here will actually recognize, or just others that I thought were cool or likable enough to get bumped up above the C tier. So let's go! Kicking things off, we have Frisky's dad. Being just an extra at the wedding and the sign, he doesn't really do that much, but dang, his design goes super hard. Like, it's almost scary how much good effort they put into making him stand out, even though he barely does anything. Not surprised he has his fans, despite being an extra. The Surfer from Show and Tell. This is another random guy who also had a huge following for like a solid 2 weeks, but for what he is, even I have to admit his design is kinda nice. Rusty's mom. Overall, Rusty's mom is kinda hard to rank, because on one hand, she's a super kind, caring mom who has a great relationship with her kids, but also, if she gets upset, yeah, you're completely done for. But I suppose you can also argue most moms are like that, so I guess maybe it's realistic to some. Sparky. Oh boy, another fan favorite for Bluey Twitter. Who could have seen that coming? Just like the others, I'm not as obsessed with him as some were, because I actually have something vaguely resembling a life. But jokes aside, he's actually a really decent guy, and I actually kinda hope he comes back, even if that's probably unlikely. The Surfer from the beach. Overall, I like her design more than the other Surfer, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Aunt Trixie. Whoa, a notable family member in the list already? That's definitely not gonna anger anyone at all. Feel free to write in the comments. But with that said, I would argue that Trixie in some form is actually the weakest of the main family, because compared to the cousins and Uncle Stripe, she really doesn't even do that much. And in general, she kind of fills the role of just being a mom for Socks or Muffin in the few scenarios where it's actually needed. Although with that said, she's not really bad in any way, and has a couple fun moments, but they're just not as important usually. Rusty's dad. Some of you might argue I'm actually giving this guy too much credit since he's still kinda new, at least when it comes to finally seeing his face, but I'll be darned, this guy is pretty cool. The fact that he's in the army away from his family provides for an interesting setup with his kids, and in general, he seems like this kinda tough, but also really fun and caring guy with a decent look. Definitely excited to see him more in future episodes. John Luke. In general, John Luke is a character that's kinda hard to appreciate. And no, it's not because he's from Quebec, none of you better say that, but because he's such a nice and good character, yet only appears in one episode, and will probably never appear again. The whole point of his character was to tell a message about coping with the loss of a friend, and not knowing when you'll see them again. So with that, his relevance on the show is pretty limited, but for the one job he had, it was admittedly done pretty well, so there's that. Winnie. Similar to John Luke, Winnie is another kind, nice character that's only had one real prominent episode, but unlike the former, I'm almost confident Winnie will return for at least one more episode, so I'm keeping hope. Jack's mom, followed by Jack's dad. Overall, Jack's parents don't do a whole lot, but for what they are, his mom seems like a really nice and understanding person, despite everything Jack's going through, and while it's clear his dad doesn't really understand him as much, he can still be a decently fun character, especially with him getting lost in the episode Explorers. And overall, he just comes off as this wonderfully awkward and unconfident guy, but in a way that's arguably more charming than annoying. So with that, he gets a slight lead above his wife, Indy. Overall, regarding Bluey's friend group, Indy is also another character that isn't the most popular, but personally, I think she's a lot more memorable than some others such as Coco. And she does get a couple interesting conflicts here and there, such as her moments with Rusty in Season 1, so at least it's something. The Ice Cream Lady. This is another one I'm probably giving way more credit than it deserves, but come on, it's a character that sells ice cream! Awesome job, keep up the good work. The Argentinian Backpacker. I know it's kind of unfair to rank her so much higher than her French counterpart, but honestly, I just really like her design. It's simple, but very nice. And her questioning over how Jack's dad has no idea where his son goes to school is honestly super funny.
I'm trying to find my son's school.
You don't know what your son's school is?
Bruh.
And now, just missing the top 50, we have our newest character so far, the future child.
Oh no.
Obviously, this one is tough to rank because they only appear very briefly at the end of the very last episode of Season 3. But with that, I just included it since while they're not very interesting on their own, the implications and possibilities of this character's existence in the future is kind of fun to speculate on. Is it Bluey's kid? If so, who did she have it with? Is he even related to the family at all? Who knows?
Ooh, Bluey's gonna marry Kenzie.
No, I'm not.
But with that, now that we're officially in the top 50, we're gonna kick things off with Major Tom, the talking horse from the episode Stories. I'm sure most people either have no idea who this is, and those who do probably just remember him for being voiced by the Hamilton guy, and I'm almost confident his only purpose was to just be a celebrity cameo, but he also is kind of a fun character that just adds more to the chaotic energy of this episode. definitely one of the more odd but funny characters in the show.
Major Tom?
Indy's mom. Overall, Indy's mom isn't seen too often, but I do think that she's pretty interesting. She kinda gives off this all-natural, chill hippie parent vibe, with her putting herself on, or at least Indy on, a really strict diet, avoiding sugar and a bunch of other stuff. And honestly, that's all she's kinda known for. But whether you agree with her choices or not, you gotta admit that it's at least a unique perspective. And now for the 48th spot, we have... let me check my list here. Oh boy. Muffin Cupcake Healer. Yeah. This is probably gonna be one of the most controversial rankings, because Muffin is essentially one of those characters that everyone either absolutely adores or despises. And to this day, people still debate whether she's genuinely annoying or just a funny representation of kids. Overall, once again, I'm kind of in the middle, as she wasn't a character I really cared for the longest time, but as of season 3, I do think she has gotten much better moments, while still carrying that chaotic energy she's known for. And in general, I think the balance has been a lot better. So compared to my last ranking, I decided to move her up a few spots.
I'm still playing with it.
Muffin, you hang that phone up now!
Maynard. If I'm being honest, Maynard is just one of those characters that's completely impossible to hate. He just keeps to himself, does his thing, and probably hasn't interacted with anyone outside his friends in decades. But honestly, it seems like he's really enjoying it, and still goes out of his way to be nice to others. And basically, he's kinda the dude I wish to be when I get older. Mackenzie's dad, followed by Mackenzie's mom. I know these two definitely have their fans, and I'm not one of them, but overall, these two aren't that important, and they're just kinda there, but their character designs are pretty cool, and the picture of his dad in that one book is really funny. Never let that dude cook again. Although with that, I decided to put the mom a spot above, as her moment in Curry Quest was a nice addition to her character. Judo. So, if there's one character that covered huge ground between the last ranking and this one, it's Judo. Because while she's still mostly known for being super mean to Bingo and Butterflies, with her more recent appearance in the episode Dirt, I feel as if we really got to see a different side of her, and that it's way easier to empathize with her. So while she isn't perfect still, I think Judo is far from the dislikable bully she was once known as, and to some extent, a genuinely interesting character with her recent story. Dusty. Honestly, Dusty is a pretty recent character, and she hasn't done a whole lot, but honestly, I think her appearance just speaks for itself. Because Dusty is one of the most adorable characters in the entire show. From the few appearances she has, she always steals the scene. And rightfully so, because she just radiates wholesome energy. Everyone needs to protect her at all costs. Doreen. For a rather unassuming character, Doreen has actually had a couple somewhat prominent roles. But overall, while she doesn't really stand out too much, Doreen just comes off as this super nice, gentle lady who couldn't hurt a fly. I mean, if you think about it, in the episode Granny Mobile, her main flaw was that she's basically too nice to others, which I think says a lot in itself. Alternate Energy Dog.
How would you like to save?
Okay, I'm sorry, but I have to confess. As fair as I tried to be with this ranking, this one is just a personal addition. By any standard logic, he should be a high C tier at most, but honestly, I just love the energy he gives off. He comes off as this charming but kinda awkward guy who's just trying to get paid and forced to pitch whatever offer he's selling to this grown man making farm animal sounds at him. Overall, amazing content. And now, in spot number 40, we have Tiny. I don't have too much to say about him, but I do really like the idea of him being this super intimidating cricket player, whilst also still being nice or somewhat encouraging. With him being so good at what he does, I expected him to be like super mean and stuff, but it turns out that on the inside, he's basically the complete opposite. In some way, it's actually kinda wholesome. And now up next, we have Bucky Dunstan. Everyone's favorite, and absolutely not hated by anyone at all. But jokes aside, even if you are one of the many people who don't like him, and is super excited to hear about how annoying and outlandish he is, I regret to inform you that this won't be happening. Because, unpopular opinion, but I actually kinda like him. Now okay, to be honest, I can kinda understand why people don't like him, because he does come off as uncaring and full of himself. But on the other hand, it's not like he's done anything actually bad, and if anything, it feels like a persona he's just kinda putting on for show. And on top of that, I also feel like it's unfair to rag on him for selling the family's house because, well, that's literally what the family was paying him to do? So yeah, I do think that he is really overhated, and in general, I think he's actually kinda entertaining and I really do like his design, but feel free to write in the comments if you think otherwise. However, going from a disliked character to a fan favorite, we have Bob Healer next. Overall, it's kinda hard to rank Bob because for the most part, he was just totally absent from the show for years. To the point that a good chunk of fans straight up assumed he died? But with the few appearances he had, including his very recent return, he's an alright character. Not one I would stand on Twitter exactly, but he has a few fun moments. And the idea of him either being completely out of touch with what's happening, or just being completely done with the antics going on around him, is just really funny. Frank, aka Chloe's dad. He also doesn't do that much, but to be frank, I do have to give him some extra credit, as his role in Octopus is pretty important, with his more realistic interpretation of the Octopus game, helping Chloe learn that people don't have to do things the same way, and both of them bonding over the new version of Bluey's game. Other than that, he's a somewhat simple but kinda fun character whenever he's present. The Terriers. So yeah, this one is kinda cheating because it's actually 3 characters, but since they're almost always together anyways, I think it works. Overall, some of their antics can be juvenile at times, because, well, you know, they're kids, and that's what kids do, duh. But they've also been shown to be quite helpful and even downright just relatable at times too. And with them basically being triplets always working together, it does add an interesting dynamic to whatever story they're in. Dougie. Now regarding Dougie, I feel like it's kinda hard to rank him too high. He's really only appeared in 1 episode, but credit where credit is due, I do think he's great for what he is. Not only does he serve as a great and natural representation of the deaf, with him using sign language, but he's also just an incredibly wholesome and kind-hearted soul, who would honestly get along greatly with the other characters like Bingo if they ever met. Although with that said, the official website does say that he's already friends with her, so maybe they met at some point off camera? Who knows? And on the subject of Season 3 newbies, we have Chucky next. Being another relatively recent character, there's not too much to rank him on, but with his hilarious reaction in Pass the Parcel, and his kinda sad moment in The Decider, he has a couple great moments, and I think he definitely deserves to be on the higher end of the list. Digger. Another new character from Season 3, he's only really appeared in a single episode for now, but even with his limited time, it's made pretty obvious that he's such a caring brother for Rusty and even Dusty, and seeing him support Rusty during cricket is honestly super wholesome. Winton. For being a character that's actually been around for a while, Winton really hasn't gotten much attention until very recently, and while he does kinda just come off as a kid who does random things, he has gotten some development and stories over the show's course. And even when he does annoy the other characters, it's pretty clear that he just doesn't know better, which shows how innocent he is. And I think there's something kind of adorable and special about that. Uncle Stripe.
Not again. I'm not
not strong enough.
Some of you are gonna be upset he's not at least an A tier, but you know what? Knowing how much of an absolute fan I am of this dude, I could have easily put him in the C tier. But humor aside, yeah, he's not really my favorite. I mean, for the longest time, his whole shtick is that he leaves his kids behind to be someone else's problem, and his attempts to actually do anything almost never end well.
Hey there, Rock Socks. How about we...
Well, I'm out of ideas.
But on the other hand, I don't really dislike him as much as I joke about it, because even I gotta admit that he does have some sweet or relatable moments, and his role in Squash was actually really well done. So there you go, Uncle Stripe fans. I finally said something nice about your Lord and Savior. I hope you're happy now.
Classic Stripe.
And now coming in number 30, we got Chili's mom. Now this one is kinda challenging because, well, how do I put this? She's canonically dead. But from the little we've heard about her, it seemed like she was a really nice and caring mother who ultimately influenced Chili to be the kind and understanding person she is currently. So kudos to her. Pom pom. I'ma be honest, this is another one that gets pretty much all of their points from having a super neat design, as the fact that she's basically a tiny, sentient fluff ball is a super cute idea. But even outside of that, her story about her finding out that she can still be useful or helpful, despite her incredibly small size, is super wholesome and lots of fun. Alfie. Compared to my last ranking, I took Alfie down a few spots as I don't think he's quite as impressive as I made him out to be, with him really being a one-time character, but for what he is, he's also incredibly fun to watch for the little time he gets, with him being so nervous about doing a good job, only to persevere regardless and impress everyone. I've used this word way too much, but yeah, it's super wholesome and he's just a pure soul. Cornelius. Having an entire multi-season long arc, and all in the background of various random episodes, I think this alone makes him an incredibly interesting character. The fact that it's basically about him being a divorced dad, going on multiple dates, and then finally finding someone he loves in the terrier's mom is really neat to see slowly happen. And the conclusion of it all during the sign is just chef's kiss perfection. Also, if that wasn't enough, he also makes a living selling toffee apples. That's pretty cool. Fido. Another fan favorite. It's pretty easy to just disregard him as a pat recolor, but from the little we've seen of him, he seems like a really chill guy that's easy to get along with, as seen with his friendship with Bandit. Hopefully he returns soon. Chloe. Being Bluey's best friend, at least according to every official source ever, Chloe surprisingly doesn't get too much attention, but for the few big roles she has, she's an overall decent character who's usually just kind of there to enjoy whatever's happening, with the occasional small conflict here and there. So while she's not as impactful as some of Bluey's other friends, I think she's great enough for the role she plays. Bella. In general, Bella is another character that's also impossible to hate. She really only has one notable role, but darn it, it's an incredible one at that. With her going out of her way to comfort Chili and Baby Race, and let her know that she's still trying her best and all, it's amazing stuff. And honestly, I'm surprised she hasn't been given more appearances. Mia and Captain. Now of course, for those who don't know, my good old BF Ruli is a massive fan of these characters. But newsflash, recently I found out he broke up with me and kinda left me. Sorry if this is how you found out, but with that in mind, since the biggest defender of these two is no longer a good old BF, I can talk trash about these two however much I want. Although, to be honest, even with this newly granted ability, I still won't, because while they definitely suffer from only one relevant episode in Itis, no, the background cameo in Curry Quest doesn't count, they are still really likable, understandable, and relatable characters for the little time they're given, and I do think that they will eventually return for more stories. Eventually. Snickers. Overall, there isn't too much to Snickers. Compared to the others, he really doesn't have any major or deep stories, but honestly, he's just great for what he is. Being a dachshund, or however you pronounce it, he naturally has a ton of great moments, whether it be involving his unique abilities, or just him being hilariously random. In general, he can be quite the surprise, but a welcome one. So to begin the A tier, we have the hairdo legend himself, Rad Healer. And you know what? I'm here to say it right now. Rad isn't the best, he isn't in the top 5, and he isn't even in the top 10. At least for me. I honestly can't believe it either, but before anyone grabs their pitchforks, yeah, he does come off as super chill, and even I agree he's like the definitive cool guy, and his design is god tier, but I feel like I have to bring him down just a little bit. Mainly just because his role in the Bluey video game is, well, certainly a role that exists, because in that game, this dude was so worried about getting his hair wet that he pretty much made the entire family have to work around extra and waste their time just to help him. Only for him to reward us by unleashing a new Chattermax toy that's somehow even worse than the original, which says a lot considering that the whole point of Chattermax was that he's annoying. Like, come on dude. But other than that though, he's actually a really great guy, and he does give off immaculate vibes. So while I don't consider him to be the best, and he can be a bit vain at times, his roles in the actual show tend to be quite great. As in like, all 2 or 3 of them anyways. But with that, I can see why he does have such a huge following.
I've fallen, and I can't get up!
So for spot number 19, we have a character that has made an absolute jump compared to my last ranking, and it's none other than Wendy herself. Originally, I think I ranked her in like the D tier or something last time, so how exactly did she end up all the way here now? Well, to be honest, while yes, she did definitely start out as just your standard, grumpy, kinda posh neighbor, thanks to season 3, we've learned so much more about her, including the fact that, while she's certainly not a fan of Bandit's sense of humor, she can actually be quite fun on her own, and despite her feelings towards that big blue guy, actually seems to enjoy Bluey and Bingo's company quite a bit. And when it comes to the episode Dirt, we've even seen her make compromises and comfort judo when she felt left out, with her literally cutting her and her daughter's hair just so she can play with the others and not feel left out, which is honestly super respectable. So with all of that, I think she definitely deserves the massive boost in the rankings. Now at number 18, we have Leela. Being Bingo's best friend, Leela has a few episodes, and of course, she's usually one of the most kind and pure souls in every single one. Whether it's helping bugs off a water slide, or being happy for the new toys they get, seeing Leela interact with Bingo is always a guaranteed wholesome moment. And overall, it is pretty nice to see her finally get the attention she really deserves. Number 17, Busker. So this is gonna be one of the more random choices, because he's not really a character with any arcs or stories, and outside of the rare line or two, yeah, he's mostly a background character. But I'll be darned, I just cannot deny the fact that he's still one of the absolute coolest characters in the entire show. Whenever he does appear, even if briefly, he's always playing music in some form, whether it's being a street musician, a full-on party DJ, or scaring that buddy kid at the market, each instance is a blast. And overall, he's just one of those characters that whenever he shows up, you know things are going to get awesome. So quickly jumping in here, but I was just looking up the episodes this guy appears in, and apparently Busker was only in 4 episodes? When making this, I swore he appeared in way more, but now I look kinda dumb because it just seems like I'm really overhyping this guy. Although even with his limited roles, I still think he is super cool. And this is all my opinion regardless, so I guess he could stay here. Also, on top of that, he's of course another character voiced by the show's composer, Geoff Bush, which, fun fact, is also the inspiration for Busker's appearance, which is honestly pretty cool in itself. It's like he's an actual character in the show he works on. Pretty neat stuff. Number 16, you knew this one was coming, Jerry Lee. I'll keep this one short since I've talked about this dude probably way more than any sane person should, but in summary, for a literal child's doodle, Jerry Lee is surprisingly goated. No matter what absurd, imaginary situation he's put in, he always figures things out and does everything without even saying a single word. And honestly, I have no idea why he doesn't talk, but if I had to take a guess, I would assume it's because he's wise enough to communicate through his sheer greatness alone. Amazing character, the absolute GOAT, period. Number 15, Janelle. Being a character that's really only existed through mentions for the longest time, Janelle is a relatively new character when it comes to actual appearances, and yet is arguably already one of the most likable. Similar to most of the parent characters, Janelle also tends to be very nice and caring, but also isn't afraid to stand for what she believes in. Like in general, she feels like the type of person who would always hear you out, but wouldn't be afraid to call you out for doing something stupid, which I think makes her an honestly incredible fun character to watch, and one I really hope gets more appearances. Number 14, Frisky. Being Bluey's godmother and now Rad's wife, Frisky is obviously a character that doesn't appear too much, but for what she is, I think there's a ton to enjoy about her. Not only is her design incredibly fun and pretty unique, but I also think she's very interesting even character-wise, as throughout the show, we see her as just this fun and incredibly kind figure to the kids, but we also see a different side of her that's a little bit more troubled, with her still getting over her breakup in her very first appearance back in season 2, and over time, becoming closer to Rad, where she still has a few issues that the two eventually work out together. And with this additional arc and element, I think it really gives her another level of relatability, making her appearances feel that much more impactful. Number 13, Socks. Overall, what else can I even say about Socks that honestly hasn't already been said? As literally everyone and their grandma knows, Socks is adorable, and whenever she appears, she's always there just to have a fun time, even if her sister isn't exactly the most generous, to put it lightly. But in spite of all these issues, she keeps finding a way to just keep going, and compared to season 1, it seems like she's also learned not to chomp on people's arms or legs, so that's also a plus. Number 12, Brandy. Having one of the most unique origins for a character in the show, Brandy's story actually begins during the Bluey's Big Play live show of all things, where she is first mentioned, followed by her actual first appearance in season 3, with her most important episode being her debut in Onesies. And I swear, everything related to Brandy is just pure emotion. In a good way, of course. Whether it's about her reconnection with Chili after years of not talking, or her struggles with not having a child of her own, Brandy is a character that is incredibly easy to sympathize for, and yet through it all, is still an absolute champ, by learning to deal with her struggles, and still be there for others regardless. Also, in the sign, it looks like I guess she did have a baby somehow anyway, so I guess that arc is just over, but who knows, maybe it'll lead to something good. And speaking of family, number 11, we have Chris, aka Nana. Now regarding fan favorites, I'm surprised Nana doesn't get more mentions considering how much she appears, but through her own sincerity and calmness, she's great to have in the show, and an amazing figure to the rest of the family, even if they don't always appreciate her. And overall, it just seems like she's a really sweet soul, and someone you would want to have take care of you. As long as you don't eat those mini cereals anyways. But now, At the big number 10, we finally made it, and we're starting with Calypso. This character right here is arguably one of the most beloved characters in the show, possibly ever. And when you watch at least one single episode with her in it, it's instantly obvious why. She's kind, understanding, wise, and more often than not, essentially acts as the ultimate problem solver for anyone who needs it, with her often letting her students have time to figure out things on their own, while still providing guidance and lessons to help them out. Overall, a pretty great role model and caring figure by any accord. And of course, just like most of the important characters, her design is also really cool too. Number 9, Grandpa Mort. This is another one that tends to be a fan favorite, and frankly, I have to completely agree, because everything about him since his very first appearance is nothing short of absolute fun. Whether it's him going on crazy escapades with the grandkids, or just trying to figure out how modern technology works, every single role he gets, big or small, always has him deliver. And while he's obviously not perfect, I think his flaws are honestly kinda relatable, which in some ways honestly makes him even more likable. And overall, to me at least, he kinda just represents the most fun aspects about being with your grandparents. And I think that's a super fun dynamic. But speaking of fan favorites, we have arguably the ultimate fan favorite of all time, which is of course, at number 8, Pat. Now similar to Mort, he's gotten a few appearances throughout the show, and all of them range from being funny to just straight up awesome. Most of them involve him getting into some kind of fun trouble with the healers, where no matter how crazy things get, he always has the kindness to just go along with it and have some fun, even if he does sometimes get the short end of things. And even outside of that, when he's just doing his own thing or just straight up not getting things right, he's still incredibly fun to watch. Something about him kinda coming off as this traditional, strong guy set in his ways, only for him to almost instantly freak out under pressure or just simple kindness, is a hilarious scene to watch. And overall, whether it comes to his positives or even his flaws, any episode with him is bound to be a crazy but hilarious adventure. Now at number lucky 7, we have Jack. Now of course, I'm sure many of you can already guess why he's so high up on the list, of course. And if anything, some of y'all will probably argue he should be even higher, which I honestly consider to be absolutely valid. But overall, even though he only has a couple prominent episodes and a few appearances here and there, Jack is also one of those characters that is incredibly fun to see in any episode. He's caring, considerate, and his friendship with Rusty is literally the sweetest thing ever. And on top of that, it's also implied that he has ADHD, and while it's shown to give him some difficulties, with others even straight up judging him at times, they also still show that despite this, he can still succeed and find his place in the world, with others such as Rusty not only accepting him for who he is, but treating him just like pretty much any other friend, and something that doesn't need to be pointed out. And yeah, I know I'm being kind of a hypocrite since I am pointing this out myself, but I just thought it was personally a great example of how representation should be done in shows. However, even outside of that, Jack is just an overall amazing character, and for many an incredibly relatable one with struggles, but also many, many positives that make him unique in ways outside of his condition. And of course, at number 6, we can't forget Jack's best friend, Rusty. Overall, while he usually only gets a notable episode here and there, I feel like I just had to rank him pretty high up because honestly, there's basically zero reason to dislike him at all. Regardless of what challenge he's put up against, or the many friends he's worked with, he always sees a way to find a good solution, even if he doesn't always understand what's happening. And although he does occasionally have conflicts with some of the others, he more often than not learns from these situations, and honestly, comes off as a pretty reasonable and understanding character, even more than some of the adults I'd argue. And on top of all this, his roles are also some of the most fun in the show, with him also having his good fair share of funny and silly moments.
Thanks, Bluey. We're going down!
This is a fun fact I'm sure some of you don't know yet, but I've heard that during early development, Rusty was actually considered to be the main character before Bluey came along. And honestly, if he would have been anything like he is currently, I think it could have actually worked super well. He's honestly that great. But speaking of which, that officially wraps up the A tier, and now we will officially cover my final top 5 and our final tier, the S tier. Kicking off the top 5, we have Bluey herself. Yeah, this one might be controversial, because having the literal main character barely hit the top 5 sounds like pure heresy, and yeah, I'll confess to that. In fact, I was actually gonna put her in the A tier, but I really wanted to keep the S tier at a clean top 5 characters. And with her being the 5th one, she barely squeezed in here. But overall, I feel as if regarding the main 4 characters, Bluey is in some ways possibly the least unique one, as with her being the main character, she kinda has to appeal and be relatable to everyone watching, which in some cases can arguably make some of her conflicts and situations not feel as impactful or personal. However, that's not to say that she's a weak or generic character, or one that doesn't have any depth. Because despite what I said, she's still a very strong character, both figuratively and even in some cases literally. Like, did you see the way she pushed Chili over in hairdressers? That was crazy. But messing around aside, whether it's simple conflicts such as her learning to get along with her sister, or the occasional deeper stories such as learning to cope with the loss of a friend or, heck, even outright death itself, she's far from just a blank slate, and has a lot of great elements to her character regardless, as there's just something really interesting about seeing her learn some of the hardships and difficult moments in life, but still being able to create an imaginative, nicer world for not only herself, but also everyone around her. So while not the number 1 character in my opinion, she's still very much worthy of being the lead character. And now at number 4, we have the last non-healer character for the list, which is of course Mackenzie. I'ma be honest and admit that I might be overhyping this guy just a little bit too much, but overall, Mackenzie has always been one of my top favorites, because he is just so much fun. Whether it's his random moments, snarky moments, or just being way more honest than he probably should, almost all of his appearances, which mind you there are actually quite a few, are either incredibly funny, entertaining, or both. And even then, while he's arguably one of the best characters from a comedic standpoint, he's also got a deeper side of him too. As seen in episodes like Space and even briefly Army, we can see that he does have some trouble on the inside, with him going through issues such as struggling with the idea of being abandoned. Now of course I should mention that he wasn't actually abandoned, but the idea does really get to him, and in Space, the whole episode is pretty much about him learning to deal with this, making for an admittedly kinda strange but very memorable moment. So overall, while he's not the main character, or even a part of the main family, Mackenzie has a ton of aspects that make him really interesting in all fronts. And it's really no surprise that he's arguably one of the most popular of Bluey's friends. And now, with 3 spots and 3 main characters left, we have Bingo in 3rd place. I could spend an entire video talking about her and the other 2 on this list, but to keep it short, Bingo is also just incredibly fun and, at times, a surprisingly mature and wise character, despite just being 5 years old. From one moment, she could be arguing over how to play a game with her sister, or pretending to be a goofy old lady, and the next moment, she's standing up against a bully who's like 4 times her size, and showing everyone who's boss. And in general, I think that's why Bingo is so beloved, as she does have this trait of being able to stand up against others and even be chaotic at times, but also at the end of the day, still has this compassion to be nice to anyone she can, whether it's a friend or even just a small insect. Like, I kid you not, but Bingo is the type who would literally not hurt a fly. And of course, it also goes without saying that she does have her own emotional moments too. And while some of them are just things like, oh no, the game went wrong, others such as Sleepy Time or Curry Quest are genuinely relatable and emotional, both for the kids and adults watching. And because of that, I think it makes Bingo a pretty important addition to the show, and that she rightfully sits as one of its most popular. But now, coming into second place, we have Chili. Similar to Bingo, Chili is also extremely beloved, and while she hasn't quite been as prominent as another certain parent will surely get to, she has gotten more and more roles over time, and more often than not, her roles give her a really good balance of being caring and helpful to both of her kids, and sometimes even the audience with her wisdom, but she also stands as being incredibly relatable for the parents watching. Like, yeah, she always has fun playing with her family and she does take great care of them, but she also does have these moments when she just needs a break or questions if she's even doing the right thing, which are legitimate struggles. And with all this, combined with all the background lore involving her losing her mother and even her sister for a few years, it just all makes her an incredibly sympathetic character that you just want to root for and can see succeed throughout the show. But now with all that said, we are finally at our last character, the one I consider to be the absolute best. It's one you'll never guess, and it's such an obscure character. Yeah, it's Bandit. I'm not gonna play you any longer. You know he's my favorite, I know he's my favorite, and we honestly all knew this was coming the moment this started, but in my defense, I think he's actually that good. His personality is fun, his ideas are not always perfect, but still incredibly entertaining. His alter egos and own characters he has are super creative, and his design is so simple, but so cool. I mean, if you look at it, his dark fur makes him look like a bandit, and his name is Bandit. Ha! Get it? And on top of that, he just has so much going for him. Outside of the fun ideas and crazy games he gets involved with, or in some cases dragged in against his will, he can also prove that he does have some wisdom of his own, and that despite being the parent, is still sometimes learning himself, with him occasionally learning new things along with his kids, or even being taught by them, such as when he learns about dealing with negative emotions from Bluey herself, showing that there is this deeper, more conflicted side to him, and that he's not always just this comedic, always perfectly nice parent, but at the end of the day, still tries his best regardless, even in moments where it's not clear what's the right call to make. And outside of that, I could talk about his fun banter with his brothers, his fun flashback story and fairy tale, his amazing drummer skills, the fact that he has a PhD, and even his perfectly amateur drawing skills. But the original draft of this video is already surpassing 10,000 words and 40 pages, so I think I'll just leave it at that. But in summary, he's incredibly fun in so many ways, and yet still has time to be very interesting, with tons of emotional moments, struggles, lore, and pretty much everything you want in a great character. And all of that, plus even more I haven't even spoken of, makes him, in at least my opinion, still the best Bluey character in the show of perhaps all time. And now with all that, there was my ranking on every single Bluey character. I apologize if this video got insanely long, as there were a ton of characters to cover this time, and that's even without some of the background ones I ended up skipping, but overall, I hope you enjoyed this fun ride, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts down below. I'm curious to see how you would rank some of these characters, and what you would consider to be the absolute best or worst. However, until next time, my name's Hideaki, and I'll be seeing you all soon. Goodbye, everyone. So for today's art of the day, we have this gorgeous piece by Darren Dank from Twitter, or X. I thought this art of Hideaki was amazing, and with all the details of the lighting and such, I can tell this took a ton of work, and it's honestly one of my favorites. So thank you very much.